Well, this week certainly whizzed by. Here we are, back in my garden. Welcome. I was tempted to respond to a few of the comments to my last video, but I think I've learnt my lesson, so I will let that sleeping dog lie. And all the same, if any of those unexpected newfound viewers are still with me, this week you've got a special treat in store, a little bit of mathematics. So here goes. During the week I was drawn to a video that popped up in my YouTube feed, what I believe is called a short form video. Very excitable chap, the very quintessence of the crazy maths professor, hair flying all over the shop, eyes bulging, most excited about something that on the surface seems absurdly ludicrous. But it certainly caught my attention. What this gentleman was attempting to do was find the number in the middle of 0 and infinity. Now, this does sound like the sort of stuff of crank videos. There is no middle of 0 and infinity. They're quite different beasts. 0, fantastic little invention that came from ancient India and revolutionized mathematics in the first millennia after Christ. We didn't have zeros until then, but very, very useful. Infinity, on the other hand, whilst the concept is, stretches back to the Bible and beyond, as an idea in mathematics, it's always been fairly elusive, and theories of infinity only really started to come together in the 19th century. We have to deal with what were called infinitesimals, the sort of end of a process in the development of calculus in the 17th century. Famously, Bishop Berkeley, also a mathematician, described outraged by these infinitesimals, almost an affront to God, called them the ghost of departed quantities or something like that. So infinity is a very strange thing. It's not really a number. It's an amount of numbers or a process. So what can we possibly make of trying to find the middle of a process and nothing at all? Although it's a handy question to ask, because between the void and the infinite, what's in the middle? Us, perhaps? I don't know. Let's see what this maths professor argued. Maths popularizer. Well, first of all, he dismissed any sort of additive attempt at this answering this conundrum. And obviously, if you take any number, let's call it x, we're mathematically literate here, and doubled it, 2x, x can't be the middle, because then 2x would be the end, and of course we could just take 2x and add 1 to it, or add 1 million, whatever you like, and just keep on doing that process ad infinitum. And surely there was never a better time to use that little phrase. So it does seem like an impossible task, but the man with the crazy eyes put forward a fascinating argument, and I'm quite convinced, even though of course it's nonsense on one level, certainly on a mathematical level. If you take any number, it has a reciprocal. X, 1 over x. 2, 1 over 2, or 1/2. 3, 1 over 3, 1/3. 1/4, 1 divided or 1 over 1/4 is 4. And this works for all numbers. You can throw in the irrationals. Pi, the square root of 2. They still have a reciprocal, 1 over the square root of 2. And they're very important reciprocals because they allow us to produce what is called the multiplicative identity, 1. If you take any number x and multiply it by 1 over x, you get the number 1, which is a very important property in the theory of mathematics. But there's also an interesting little point, which you might have noticed. Every number below 1 and every number larger than 1 has a reciprocal. So they form pairs and nothing's left out. And what that effectively means is that you have the same number of numbers below 1 as you have above 1, all matched up into nice reciprocal pairs. Consequently, according to our by now rabid maths expositor, 1 is the middle of 0 to infinity. Because all the numbers lie between 0 and infinity. Well, not the negative numbers, not the complex numbers, but the positive, and let's be positive on this channel, the positive numbers, the positive real numbers. All of them lying between 0 and infinity, they are all part, happily, of a pair of reciprocals. And so we have the same number before, less than 1, the same number of them greater than 1, consequently 1 is the middle of 0 and infinity. And that really, I'd never thought about it like that before. It's not something that I'd come across, partly because why would you? It has nothing to do with anything really. It doesn't make terribly much sense, not common sense variety. But it's an intriguing sort of notion. And also, if you think about spaces or numbers, the number line being part of that Cartesian plane, a constituent, the numbers stretching out towards infinity, it means that you have this enormous dense cluster of numbers between 0 and 1. And then this enormous, the same number spread out between 1 out into the blue yonder of infinity. So it seems to suggest that the gaps between the numbers must be growing larger and larger. Of course, that doesn't make terribly much sense, because between any two numbers you can find another number. You add them and divide by 2, and Bob's your uncle. There's a number between those two numbers, sort of popping out by magic. Infinity is a very slippery sort of beast. And this idea of reciprocals just spiced it up a little for me. I really enjoyed that. But then something strange happens. Because thinking about the word reciprocal, it's not one you come across very often. Probably more frequently reciprocate. My gran was fond of that. You know, one always had to reciprocate. Someone invited you to tea, you invited them back. You got a Christmas present next year, surprise. Next year you bought that person a present. All part of a very careful scheme to make the world run in a nicer sort of way. And of course, if I was following, and I do sometimes, sort of blubberings about the economy, and I'm going to be very careful not to slip down that rabbit hole. But we are talking at the moment in the world of economics, people are talking about tariffs because that got mentioned. And of course, if one country slaps on a tariff, you can bet that the victims will have reciprocal tariffs. But beyond those sorts of examples, it's not a word reciprocal that you come across very often. But strangely enough, this isn't strange. I've started a new chess course on endgame studies. And there's a chapter called reciprocal thinking. What on earth is that? It's a phrase that I think was invented by, now I may well mangle this name, Georgian perhaps, something like Pater Gaprindashvili. And the book is a training book called Imagination in Chess. And it's full of truly wonderful positions that seem at first sight to be absolutely impossible. But one of his techniques for solving these sorts of problems or finding these difficult moves is a technique which he called reciprocal thinking, which involves finding an idea and then disproving it. So you see a nice looking move and then you find that it doesn't work. Now at that point, normally what one does is bin the idea and look for another one. But Pater's strategy is no, that's the point when you've got a clue as to what really the right move should be, because probably you were on the right track. I mean, your initial, what we call in chess, candidate moves, normally are moves that make sense. And the fact that you've tried one and it doesn't work perhaps indicates a flaw that if you can just solve that, you'll find a solution. And in the course that I've been studying, one of the examples that was given was truly wonderful. It's a fantastic idea that just doesn't work. And the solution to the problem involves this random pawn move on the opposite side of the board. But it's a sort of forcing move that seems to serve no purpose. It just gives away a pawn nowhere near the theatre of action. But then, because a piece now occupies that square, the black defence no longer works. It takes away a square from the queen, and lo and behold, white wins the game. All very cryptic. So reciprocal thinking, in essence, is instead of trying to make your ideas work, you make them not work and then solve that problem. You kind of flip it on the head. And it just struck me as quite interesting that in a very obscure chess course and in an even more unlikely YouTube video, you'd have the same word cropping up. And I started thinking, well, how could I make that work in my life or our lives? You know, what would reciprocal thinking really involve? And it is actually something, in a way, there's lots of different ways of describing this, naming this process. But it really is sort of embracing the negative and then seeing where that will take you, dealing with it, and in that sense, you've kind of turned the negative into a positive. And that is quite an interesting tactic. And it is, frankly, quite stoic in its sort of flavour. I remember coming across a suggestion, a stoic practice that Tim of the 4-hour work week, good Lord, his name's just flown out my mind, Tim Ferriss, as he suggested, what he has taken to doing is one day a month. He lives that day as if everything stopped working. Plumbing, energy, food supplies, the works. And he has a day where he really strips his life down to what he would have if he had nothing or next to nothing. Food, entertainment, everything. And besides being some sort of crazy survivalist training technique, it sort of makes sense in a reciprocal thinking sort of way. Because when you get through that day, and I found this in COVID, for example, when you find that you have confronted the abyss, dealt with the unthinkable, and come through the other side. Well, you've discovered a whole new range of resources that you never realized you had at your disposal. I'm not suggesting that dreadfully now cliched, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Although there is a bit of that. And you could take this as being a sort of stoic training boot camp exercise. But I don't mean it like that. I mean just finding the gold in the manure, so to speak. Finding something that shines in the deepest darkness. So that's a little snapshot from my week. Make of it what you will. I would love to hear your comments, and I suspect this week none of them will be of a one-word variety, such as hashtag my name pathetic. Strange. Never mind, I said I wouldn't mention it, but I did. That's probably a good reason to leave. So otherwise, I trust your lives are filled with joy, and until next week, from sunny Brazil, ciao.